Welcome, everyone. Let's get started.
So for today, we want to talk about workload identity a little bit. What's the status with the RFC, where we are now, and if we can, what we can ship into Flux 2.7, no, 2.6, and what is left from the RFC in 2.7. That's one thing. Another thing I wanted to discuss also around workload identity are the docs, which I think they are very messy at this point with tons of duplicates everywhere in like, I don't know, 10 APIs already. And how we can solve this. And third, to discuss a little bit about when we are going to actually do the release and review a little bit the roadmap and see, besides workload identity, what other things we have there, what we can, move to the next milestone and figure out a way to have a plan for the release. So the deadline is end of Q2. And that means I think it's end of this month, right? When does Q2 ends? Q2.
That would be the end of June.
End of June. Okay. Yeah, but I would really like to release it by, I don't know, this month. The problem is we have a Kubernetes 133 release. We kind of hinted that in our release planning that we are going to stick to the release Kubernetes release cycle. We're already 1 week after 133 release. I've started updating everything to 133. The packages are done, some controllers are done. I have created an issue around that. So I think I can finalize this week the upgrade. So yeah, I would say end of this month we should try to do the release. Deepti, Mateus, what are your ideas around this?
About the release date?
Yeah.
Fine by me.
Yeah, that sounds good. I wanted to check on the patch release. Is that going to be soon too? And is that too close to the like the minor version update?
Yeah, I don't think we are going to do any
No
patch
patch release.
releases.
Okay.
So what we did for,
I did
so
see that it
how,
was downgraded, the dependency for
yes,
that's
Yeah.
why I
and I
wanted
did
to check, yeah.
so for the breaking change in server, I've downgraded. I published a release candidate. So there is an image officially on our container images, GitHub Container Registry and Docker Hub with an image that has that downgrade. So we no longer block people that want to stay on 2.5, but have this issue with somewhere. They can just patch their bootstrap or whatever way they're deploying Flux and just swap the image, the source controller image with the release candidate. And yeah, there is another preview for customized controller, I think. But the critical one was source controller, right? Due to people not using Semver, using Calver instead of Semver and all that discussion. Anyway, I don't think the Helm team will roll back on this, and the next version of Helm will actually use the new version of Semver, and we can't
Mhm.
not do it.
Yeah. So is the plan so
So
like in 2.6 to again upgrade the dependency to
no.
3.3.1 or
So
keep it 3.0?
so the plan is like this. It was my mistake that I bumped Semver, the Semver package in 2.5. I didn't thought the patch release of the Semver package comes with such a huge major breaking change. So usually if there is a patch release on any package before a Flux release, I just bump it to get, latest bug fixes. But this was not a bug fix, right? What we need to do from this moment on is keep the Semver package at the same version with the Helm SDK dependency. So what I did now, I've upgraded all the Flux packages, Helm controller, source controller, to the latest stable version of Helm. I looked into the Go mode of Helm. Which Semver package are they using? It's 3.0.0. I took that and I put it in all the Flux packages. So from this moment on, we need to do a lock upgrade, step lock upgrade of the two packages. If Helm bumps it, when we upgrade to the next Helm version, we are going to use the exact same version of Semver that they are using in the CLI. And this way we avoid discussions, why is Flux behaving differently? Flux should behave in the same way as Helm the CLI does. And yeah, we failed to do this, sadly. So that's why I'm saying we we should release Flux 2.6, which with whatever Semver package is in Helm. Right now, if
Okay.
we release it, let's say in 1 week from now, and there is no new Helm release, it will go without the breaking change.
Mhm.
But if Helm does a release and they upgrade Semver package, we are going to follow what Helm does. Let's see when is the next Helm release, because that can tell us some more about when we could expect this thing to land. Because Helm publishes on their release okay, what's next? Helm 3.18.0 is the next minor release, and it will be May 14. So in
They
2
didn't
weeks from
even
now.
bump. They didn't even bump Semver yet. Not sure if they'll bump close to the release or if they'll bump at all. Probably need to keep an eye when, like, in their Go mod file.
That's what I've said.
Yeah.
So from this moment on, every time we bump Helm, we go into their Go mode, we see what Semver they are using, and we use the same version everywhere in Flux. Even if we use Semver in many other places, not just for Helm, right? But in order to avoid disasters like this in the future, we are going to lockstep on Helm. I
But I'm
also,
just saying that, like, we can't predict when they will bump anyway, because even though 18 is close, they didn't bump it. So they
yeah,
may or may not. We cannot give estimates of when this will happen.
yeah. But if we release Flux on the week of 14, we are not going to upgrade Helm. So we are going to release it as it is today with the dependencies today, which does not have the breaking change, right? So
Oh
it
yeah, we will upgrade to 18 for Flux 2.6.
depends on what will happen with 18. It can, if they do the release and we see issues of, it broke that, it broke this, we are not going to upgrade. We did this a bunch of times, right?
Cool.
But I know, as a rule of thumb going forward, we need to keep these two packages in sync, even if until today wasn't the case, but it is what it is.
Oh,
Okay, what we were discussing. Okay, let's discuss the roadmap. What's in the roadmap right now for 2.6? So we have this image automation promotion that is tied to updating OCI digest, which we didn't implement.
I was planning to say when the half of the year reaches and Max didn't do anything, I was planning to ping him and saying, "Hey, can I pick this up?" Because I really want to see that. It's a nice feature, like it's the ability to bump digest. It's kind of an important thing, right?
It is. That's why we can't do a GA release of image automation without it.
Yeah. Do you think I should do that? Like 2 months from now, he promised this for this year, right? And if in 2 months from now, if he doesn't do anything, then there's only half of the year left. And then I can ping him and say, "Hey, can I take over?"
Ping him today.
Today?
Yeah, ask him what's the status and if he can take over.
Cool. And if
Someone needs to take over this.
cool.
I don't know how complicated it is to. I mean, 90% of the implementation is done. I don't know.
Yeah,
You can just let
yeah,
him know you are going to pick it and that's it.
okay. And are we gonna put this in 2.6 or not? 2.7? I think it's a bit too
No,
like
GA, we
1 month.
can't do it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's too
Let's
close.
do it. Yeah, let's do it for 2.7.
But if you, I'd say like this, look at the implementation, what it entails, and maybe we can ship OCI digests in 2.6, make everything GA in 2.7.
Okay, so the feature
Right.
goes depending on how ready it is. We ship the feature, but GA only 2.7.
Yeah, because shipping a feature and GA in the same release is way too risky. So the conclusion is I'm going to leave add support for updating OCI digest here. Maybe you can do it. But I'm going to move the promotion to GA to 2.7. So we are not caught into this. Haley,
Cool.
Hi, friends.
we are discussing the roadmap. Okay, so image automation. Next, Git integration. Add support for Spark checkout. This is done. Thank you, Deepti. Add support for mutual TLS. This is also done. So all the Git integrations are done. Okay, now this one, which is a big one, and we kept moving it as well. OCI artifacts.
Are you sharing your screen, Stefan? Sorry.
No, I'm just reading the roadmap.
Okay, cool.
So if you want to follow along, go here, and we are going through the. I mean, I can share my screen once. Share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so talking about 2.6, what we decided so far is that GA promotion will not go into this milestone, and the takeaway for Mateus is to look into how complicated it is to ship this feature in 2.6, patching OCI digest in YAMLs. Git integration, this is done, this is done, this is done. So I'm going to update the roadmap and cross-check all of them. Okay, this one. And we've been kind of delaying this for a long time, but now the cache is ready, right? Mateus, right, DT? You've been using it in other places.
Yeah.
I think this is quite important. I got some feedback from both Azure and Google users around hitting rate limits. And the rate limits is not ACR, which is rate limiting, is the IAM service. Because every
yes.
time, right, is like ACR, I mean, I'm guessing those limits are very high, or GAR, right? Because yes, you pull images on all the nodes from all the clusters and so on. But the IAM services are more restricted because you are not supposed to do authentication for every single image you are pulling, what we are currently doing in source control, right? So if we have people that have switched away from Git completely, they use OCI for Flux, all things, Helm charts, Flux manifests, everything is in the container registry. So the amount of OCI repos has grown in their estate, and for every single time, and of course you want Flux to be fast, so everything is set to 1 minute, hundreds of OCI repos. Every single minute, source controller talks to the IAM role, give me a token, right? So how complicated is to ship this into source controller?
So
This
I
version.
would say we just wait for the RFC, because the RFC caching is a first class thing. The library has the with cache option, and everywhere we're implementing the RFC, we are like introducing a cache if there isn't one already. So there's already cache in source controller, image automation controller, notification controller. I'm introducing a customized controller, then it will be missing only image reflector controller. Yeah, so like maybe just like I could, for example, then if we want to release ship this in 2.6, then I could introduce the RFC libraries everywhere for single tenants. But then I will only work on the RFC until the end of the release. Like so yeah, since we're talking about the RFC, like it's done for customized controller. The Azure Event Hubs PR from DT is midway, and I would like to ship, like, I mean, it's not a huge amount of work. I don't know, but maybe we can just leave this for 2.7. Like implementing this, once we introduce the service account field for the provider API, it will be very, very easy to integrate this for Azure DevOps and Azure and Google PubSub, which are the only, so the three providers that can benefit from the RFC and notification controller are these three: Azure Event Hubs, Azure DevOps, and Google PubSub. Deepti, what's your availability to work on those? Can you help with those? Like I can test for Google.
Mhm. So actually, in terms of availability, mid-May through June, first week, I have some big on-calls on the Azure side where, you get paged overnight and things. So to be completely transparent, I don't think those 2-3 weeks I'll be able to do anything other than that big on-call. So I think, but June onwards, I can again spare some time on this. And the Azure DevOps, I'm happy to pick up. The GCP one, I feel like some GCP expert probably would have a better opportunity to test the implementation specific to that platform and like the things.
Would you be able to
Azure,
do then? Would you be able to introduce Azure DevOps in the same PR you
I
already
would
have
like to
for?
take it separately if possible. It's not on the
But-
roadmap
but-
for 2.6 as well. So.
But that's what I'm asking. You're saying you wouldn't have availability even for DevOps until the release.
I do have some other things to take care of, and like
Okay.
mid-May onwards, I'm completely occupied for at least 2.5 weeks.
Okay, no problem. Well, I think I could I think I can pick those two. Could you test in Azure DevOps only?
Yeah, is it yeah,
Like
yeah,
if-
yeah. Mhm.
If I implement this for Azure DevOps, could you like just test it?
Sure, yeah, and like yeah. And I'm happy to implement it as well, but like probably more free from June onwards,
Yeah, I mean we're discussing there.
unless it's
Wait,
super
are you-
critical for
2.6,
2.6. Yeah.
Wait, Mateo, sorry, what are you talking about here? You are talking about notification controller?
Yeah, notification controller, Azure DevOps. I think it's not on the roadmap for 2.6.
Oh yeah, that's
but-
out of
mhm.
scope altogether. Why are we talking about notification controller for this release?
I just wanted to
Like
ship
caching
for
registry. Wait, caching registry credentials is way more critical than notification controller Azure DevOps or whatever, right? Like this is a major issue for our users
Uh,
today. This is what we should prioritize.
Okay, so in that case, I think we should just implement the RFC library in source controller and image reflector controller for the registry credentials. And since they both already have service account field, we're just talking about implementing the RFC entirely for those two APIs.
Do we have service account everywhere?
We have
No,
service account for the OCI artifact APIs everywhere.
Oh yeah. For OCI we have it. So
Yeah.
you are saying in order to get the cache there, we need
just
to
use
use the
library.
new auth package. And if we use the auth package, service account is already there. Why not ship it now?
Just do the whole
I
thing.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that will not implement workload identity, multi-tenant workload identity everywhere. Because that will not be for buckets, will not be for Azure DevOps repos and other things, right?
Yeah, Git, but it will be missing Git bucket and notification controller. Notification
Yeah.
controller is only gonna get the deep TSPR.
Can
Yeah,
we
and it's
change
fine.
the?
And we leave that for 2.7, right?
Cool.
Is there no ability to just provide the object ID as the cache key instead of the service account name, so that we don't even have to add the fields until the field is actually used by something?
The fields are.
No, it's
You mean for Git and bucket?
No, for the what was it, for reflector or for customized controller?
No, so we're talking about image repository and OCI repository APIs. Both
Mhm.
already have service account name already.
Yes. Is there one where we are adding it just so that we can have a token cache key?
What? Sorry.
Maybe I misunderstood that we were going to be adding a service account field, but not implementing workload identity, and then using
no, service
that.
account is already there. So both APIs have a service account field because that's how we look up image pool tokens. So that's
Okay.
already there. We are not changing anything. We want to get cache in there,
Yeah.
and to get cache in there because cache is implemented in the auth package that does workload identity. What Mateus is saying makes no sense to just use the cache, because if we use that package, you already get workload identity working for service accounts in there, right? And the API
Yeah.
is there, so there is no reason
it's-
why not to
Yeah.
not to do it.
Easy
It's the
change.
same stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And look at yeah, so it's ACR, ECR car. That's it.
Yeah, and the auth package is even ready to support OCI because it already has the container registry access token exchange logic for all the providers.
Yeah. You move that from the existing
Yeah, I
Auth
copied the
package in
relevant
OC.
parts. Yeah, I copied the relevant parts. Exactly.
Okay, so in order to get this in, we need to merge the Azure PR in auth.
Yes, and that also is now including what we discussed today about I have to change all the other Go modules in that repo that use auth/Azure to use this new library because I deleted the old one. And that will
Yep.
also imply when I bump auth to 11 everywhere, the controllers that use that will also need to use the library. And that will be Git, source controller for Git and image automation controller for Git, essentially. Those two don't have source account name yet, so for those, we don't need to implement multi-tenant. Although it would
Yep.
be an easy change, which is just introducing a source account name, but we already have a lot of work. So I guess what I'm gonna do until the end of the release is implement the RFC entirely for image repository and OCR repository. For Git repository and image automation controller, I will implement only single tenant. And customized controller is done. Just merge, just need to merge. Already tested in various different setups. And I will also check the digest bump thing in image automation controller. I guess that's enough work for a month, right?
You don't have a month.
Is there a
It's
reason
less
to
than a
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good fit for the time I have. I am saying.
yeah.
Is there a
You
reason
think
to remove the dependency right now, forcing everybody in the very next usage of updating the auth package and package dependency to use the new workload identity, like the multi-tenant RFC auth package? Like deleting the client is the part that I'm asking. Like, can that be done after we move all the dependencies to the multi-tenant implementation and then delete? Is there a reason to like first delete it and then force everybody to use it like in the very next usage?
it's very slow on Azure. That's what we discovered.
Yeah, no, I
Like
agree that we
the
need to move. I agree that we need to move, but is there a reason to delete first, forcing everybody to move in the very next release, or is it okay to still do the
Oh no,
move
no, no.
first and do
We're
the
not.
delete
We're
of
not. We're
the
not.
thing
For
later?
we're not first force users to move anything. Is that what
Uh,
you're thinking?
No, no, I'm not talking about end users. I'm talking about users of the auth package, basically like Git and like the Git integrations and source controller, all of those. Once we
Okay.
delete the client, whenever we update the auth package, we are kind of forced to use the newer implementation. And even in source controller, whenever we bump up now Git and all of those dependencies, we are forced to do it that way, right? So can we still move over and then delete the client later on after we've done the move so that there is some wiggle room if
It's not possible because we're gonna implement the cache thing for OCI
yeah,
repository in source controller, right? So we have to
yeah,
bump.
yeah.
And when we do that,
We have to.
Mm,
Like
Yeah.
it makes no sense. Like we can't have source control depending on two
two
different authentic,
versions. Okay, now it makes sense.
right? So it's
Mhm.
like no.
Okay, so if whenever we do the caching implementation in source controller,
Yeah,
we are forced to do it anyway. So
Yeah.
we
yeah,
are
yeah.
kind of deleting
And
it
if
so that.
we do it in source controller, image automation controller has to follow source controller. We don't want to have this implementation here because we could
Mhm,
leave image automation controller as it is, right? But we
mhm,
don't want that because we do a minor release, which is in fact a major release for Flux, right? We are not bumping ever the 2 point something like Kubernetes, right? So I really don't want to have a minor release that one controller that does Git operations is very different, uses different packages and so on versus source controller. Because then if it's a bug, we need to fix it in two places. And how are we
Yep,
going to
makes sense.
fix it? Because
Mhm,
auth already is moved, right? So we are going to get ourselves in
mhm,
bigger problems later on. So I
mhm.
prefer to, try to do now the whole move. Also, the client, right, is deleting the client and replacing it with the new function does not changes anything because it's the same code. We just use a different code path for Azure for optimizing and not having that delay. But we are not moving to Azure DevOps multi-tenancy. We are still doing single tenant. The
Yeah.
same exact code path should be executed.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah, makes
now
sense.
have that, let's say, optimization for faster, getting faster tokens. That's it. So
Yep, makes sense. I think I missed the context of the like having to update it for the caching anyways. Makes sense.
yeah.
Talking about token cache, I just changed something in the customized controller PR, which I wanted to bring up here, which is customization is the only API where we're probably gonna have this. Maybe also in Helm controller if we introduce later after the RFC is implemented the kubeconfig workload identity. We in the token cache can get an involved object for the cache events metric, right? It's kind, name, and namespace. So what I did today was I appended a suffix in the kind for customization. So it's the customization kind underscore decryption. And why did I do that? Because if in the future we've implement workload identity for kubeconfig, remote cluster access, then we need underscore kubeconfig there as well because we need to differentiate the metrics. And now I have just realized that it's only going to work for, I mean, yeah, it's the only metric that takes into account and involve the object. So even though we have like 4 metrics for the token cache, the only one that really cares about distinguishing which object it is this one, and it's fine. Yeah, so is that okay if we have kind underscore decryption and kind underscore kubeconfig just for customization?
No, kind should be kind. Should represent the Flux
Then
kinds. There is no
we
custom
need to
resource called.
introduce, then we need to introduce a new label in this metric.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Scope or whatever. Operation or whatever.
operation. Okay, operation is good. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Because you want to say, you want to write a Prometheus query that targets all the customization kind, all the objects with kind customization. And now you are introducing a kind that is not a kind. It's,
I mean,
right?
you can use regexes in Prometheus, but
Come on,
sure,
man.
the query would look worse. Yeah, let's allow users to do a pretty query. Yeah. Okay. I guess I think that's it for the roadmap in regards to
No,
workload
it's not.
identity.
So we are at caching for now, right? Next,
Oh, right. Yeah.
immediate reconciliation.
That one is blocked on something west, and we're waiting for the guy to do, right? Discussions around the feature gates.
Yeah, I need to review this. Okay. Okay, so this is for me to see if this will go in or not. But anyway, it can't go in only for customer controller. If we do immediate reconciliation, we should do it for Helm as well. Alerting. Okay, so
Yeah.
alerting is the Azure
this
Event
PR.
Hub with this PR. End-to-end testing I already did. And these deprecations will move to 2.7 because we are not doing image automation Oh, this we should discuss. Are we going to delete source and customize from in this release or not?
What does that mean? Like, is you mean like the CRD has has a list of versions, right? You mean removing from the CRD?
Yep. Like if someone has V1 beta 1 in their repos, it will not work. They'll not be able to apply a Git repository V1 beta 1 from 3 years ago, or a customization V1 beta 1. We also had V1 beta 2, right? I'm saying here remove V1 beta 1, which is 3 years plus.
The controller just works with all those old APIs as of now.
Surprisingly, yes,
Holy
because
shit.
we kept backwards compatibility forever, but this can't go forever. We need to remove it at some point. What happens now is that because we support all these versions, the Kubernetes API has to do extra work. Every time you have V1 beta 1 in the repo and you apply it on the cluster, then the Kubernetes admission control, the default conversion webhook, has to parse all the fields, look into the CRD, transform it to V1, and store it in etcd. Right? And we have 3 versions for source, 3 versions for customize. We have V1 beta 1, V1 beta 2, V1, and it goes like this. But how would this impact people? Like, this is a major breaking change, like any breaking change in Kubernetes upstream when they remove a beta version. It's the same stuff. You will no longer be able to reconcile your repos if you haven't updated them in 3 years. So if you have, even if you
Yeah,
have
but I mean,
upgraded Flux, like even if you have upgraded Flux, but you didn't went into the Git repos and you didn't bump the version in the YAMLs, because right now Flux 2.5 works with a Git repository V1 beta 1 and a customization V1 beta 1 in the repo.
how dare you upgrade Flux to the latest version without doing that anyway? Like, you should have done that. Like, it's basic, right?
Yeah.
And
Do you
it-
know, Dipti, how many Azure customers have these versions in their repos?
It's hard for me to tell. Uh, yeah, it's been a couple of years, right? I think we have even deprecations, like it's been scheduled for deprecations for the past few releases. I think it's at least been in the roadmap. So I guess folks know that they need to move away, but it's hard to figure out how many of them have it.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's quite complicated. You can't access your customers'
No,
repos.
no.
That's
But
for
do
sure.
you
do you usually, like, do you know if they are usually up to date with latest Flux?
Uh, yeah, I mean, typically, at least the last 3 versions, we tell, at least our recommendation is that the last 3 versions are the one they have to be on. So, yeah.
do we have any mechanism that we have existing or can maybe use or implement that would be basically like an early warning system for deprecations at runtime? Like we could fire some Prometheus metrics from source controller whenever we see, deprecated API versions for X number of releases beforehand, so that, then in like the default Flux monitoring dashboard and that kind of stuff, like people would see like, oh, like I have deprecated API versions being reconciled from my sources.
No, your Kubernetes logs are full of warnings. This is how deprecation works. So you go into, when we have deprecated all these versions, we set in the CRD that that version is deprecated, and every time you apply it, it writes in your kubectl output, in the customized controller logs, in the Helm controller logs. You have millions of logs around deprecation, because every time you apply an old version, it creates an error log in your pods, and also the Kubernetes API, the audit log of Kubernetes API contains all these logs. You can't do it on a metric level because initcd never ends up with v1 beta 1. As I said, the Kubernetes admission controller converts it to the latest version. So if you do a
Yeah.
query in the cluster with Prometheus kubestate metric, everything is on the latest version.
Yeah, I mean, customized controller and Helm controller. It's mainly customized controller, I guess. Helm controller, it'd be hard to unpack the chart. Although we have the drift detection catalog. But yeah, I was just thinking if there's an earlier place where we can create a counter with a different way to alert on this, because yeah, it's like if somebody hasn't updated their stuff, like they're not seeing everything else. But it does seem like it would be like instrumentation of the kube API.
Yeah. It also, why would customized controller have metrics around image toolkit.fluxy.io? It doesn't even know what that API is.
Yeah, the only thing
Like
it
that means
knows.
hard coding all these strings in customized controller, parse the YAML to find them. No.
Mhm.
I mean, it,
Is there
I mean, there's
any is
the
there any
SSA.
other project from the ecosystem that has some kind of thing like that?
no, people just remove deprecated versions, not like us, and usually they do breaking changes.
Yeah.
Like Kubernetes removes beta versions every 6 months. Like there is no, this is how they roll. Like the moment they release V1, after 6 months, the next after two Kubernetes releases, all betas are being dropped. No metrics, no nothing. They just are being removed. And from that moment on, you no longer can apply things like deployment, all the stuff, right? That's how Kubernetes does it. We've
They're
been,
setting they're setting the example, right? There's nothing to discuss.
I don't know, Knative did this 1 year ago. They removed all their beta versions from these and many other projects. I mean, I don't know how longer can we keep them in Flux. And it's actually bad for performance, right? Because
It's
the Kubernetes API does extra work with converting. Everything goes through the conversion webhook.
yeah, it is as soon as you're not using the storage version, it's bad for performance. It's not particularly worse for performance to have n numbers of beta resources versus n minus 1, but I think it's like, how do you convince people to change their API version to the storage version? Deprecate the group, so they have to change it. Yeah.
Yeah, there are other concerns here. If let's say you have applied the customization V1 beta 1, and that customization is not in Git. You have applied it with kubectl or through another controller, another means. Then you have upgraded Flux. The Kubernetes admission control that does the upgrade to the latest version will never run because it does not run on storage. It only runs on requests. Now, if you, let's say you have did this with kubectl apply or whatever, Helm install, and you don't use Flux Bootstrap, what will happen, the upgrade to Flux 2.6 will completely crash because we are going to try to remove V1 beta 1 from the CRD. And what the Kubernetes API will do, will search in etcd if there is a V1 beta 1 version. And if there is, it will deny the apply of the CRD, which in turn will fail the bootstrap or whatever other controller you have or whatever is there that upgrades Flux. And you'll not be able to move forward unless you upgrade your all the versions in your storage in etcd to the latest version. And there is a trick on how you can do that with Flux itself. You just add a dummy annotation there if it's in Git. Or if you have applied it with kubectl, you need to reapply it with the new version, also bumping something in the spec because versions don't get upgraded unless you change something in the spec. I've discovered this last year.
But you're not
Which
obligated
was,
to delete the object, right? You can migrate without deleting.
You can migrate the storage. Either you add the dummy annotation or you run a third-party controller from Kubernetes. There is a controller in Kubernetes 6 called storage migration that has a custom resource. You install the controller, you put a custom resource in there that says, hey, upgrade for me all the Flux versions from this version to that version, and that controller goes into etcd, takes every custom resource, checks its version, and upgrades it. Also, Flux operator does this automatically. Flux operator, when you first deploy it, checks this, if the storage matches the Flux version, does the whole etcd upgrade automatically, and so on.
It does this for all the Flux APIs and Flux Operator
Yes.
APIs?
Yes, but if you don't have Flux operator running, you have, I don't know, Azure DevOps Flux config, or how is it called? Flux config, right? Right?
Yeah, Flux configurations. Yeah. Mhm.
Flux, yeah, there is a controller there, right? That deploys Flux.
Mhm.
Yes, so in that case, if that controller does not implement the storage upgrade and everything that I'm talking about, it will fail the upgrade if people have done kubectl apply some head release, right? If they don't store the whole state in Git and they don't use Flux fully, and they have these mixed versions, once we remove a deprecated API from the CRD, things will fail. And how I know this, because I looked at K-Status, K-Native and other projects, what users were telling after they removed stuff from the CRD. And yeah, you get into this weird state where some CRDs will be upgraded, some not. The upgrade itself will fail. Let's say maybe you have all the Git repos to V1, but only some customizations are left on V1 beta 1 because whatever, you did some kubectl applies 3 years ago. Source controller will be upgraded to source controller CRDs. Customized controller CRD will not be upgraded, right? So you are now halfway through Flux 2.6. Anyway, it will be hard for people on code
So
that are running
Stefan,
this upgrade.
what I'm hearing is that the problem is that if you don't ever change the spec from the first time that you applied the resource, that the storage version doesn't get upgraded.
There is no one to upgrade it.
Yeah, because like
because
changing the
that's
storage
admission control.
version, like there's no controller when you change the storage version on the CRD that back propagates it to old ones. So
Well,
the fix for this is to make sure that people are at some minimum API version, like before removing the storage version.
Yeah.
So like it basically in the release notes is like a requirement that
yeah, yeah. I mean,
every
I vote in just putting the upgrade procedure like steps where people can do this migration. Some steps that would work for everybody that does not rely on some specific controller that has this feature or whatever. There should be some steps that everybody can do. We put it on the upgrade procedure, and that's it. It should be enough.
But we have these upgrades from 2 years ago when we did customize V1. We tell people how to upgrade.
That's it. It's up to them to follow.
Of course, we need to, if we remove it now, we need to link again to that procedure, right?
Yeah.
We had the same when we did Helm release V2. People wanted to use drift detection or whatever, and they were enabling drift detection on V2 beta 1. We never had drift detection there, right? So I had to edit the release notes and tell them, hey, you really need to bump the version. You can't use new features with all the APIs. But in a way, it's our fault because we've always been backwards compatible. So people just ignore the version. They don't care. No one bumps it, right? Because
Yeah.
whatever version you have, it works.
So yeah, in the release notes, in the upgrade procedure, we link to that procedure, and that's it.
Yeah, and I mean it's fairly easy if you have everything in Git, because if you have everything in Git, you go into customize and customization and Git repo, you bump the version, you set an annotation, upgraded, yes, you commit it, and you know for sure before you upgrade that customized controller will move all the storage of all these resources to the latest V1. But still, the problem is, as I said before, if you have other tooling, like you do a Helm install of a chart that deploys Flux objects. A lot of people have that, right? They have in that chart the root customization, whatever, because they don't use Bootstrap. I'm guessing Azure DevOps, the config stuff applies Git repos and customizations outside of Git directly on the cluster, right? There are many integrations doing that. People are running Jenkins jobs that are doing Flux, create something, apply, right? And if they did it 3 years ago and they never changed anything in there, you can't use Flux itself to upgrade the storage because you have things that are not managed by Flux, which are Flux objects, right? So there is still the case, even if we tell people what to do in their Git repos, there is still the case the upgrade will fail if they don't run something like Flux operator before the upgrade that migrates all the storage, no matter how objects got in there.
Can I use kubectl to list the objects in node versions?
No, you need to use the etcd CLI and connect to etcd storage and see what's there.
Okay, so this is not so standard procedure.
it's not even possible to connect to etcd in most managed Kubernetes clusters. Yeah. So
yeah. You can't know what version it is because the Kubernetes API will always give you the preferred version. And guess what that is?
Well,
it's the one that's not deprecated.
We'll tell them, hey, you need to make Flux take over.
Yes. If they manage every Flux object with Flux itself, then Flux can upgrade its own resources.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
But
DP, do you need to drop now? Or, there's something we really need to talk to you about. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a few minutes. What's up?
Okay, can we talk about that now, Stefan? Is it okay? The thing, the workload concern we had. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we were discussing in our meeting earlier, the three of us. and Lee brought this very important point about workload identity, which is we may be using the cloud APIs in a way that they may not be intended to, in the sense that we are doing this token exchange using a Kubernetes service account token that should be for a pod, but it's not in the case of the RFC, right? In the RFC, we have a service account name, like you know that very well, right? You're implementing this notification controller. Their notification controller is going to be issuing a token for that service account. And the pod doing that is the notification controller pod. But for example, in AWS, AKS pod identity, this feature needs the token to have a pod claim. That needs to be the JWT issued from the Kubernetes API has to be a claim that identifies the pod. And the pod has to use the service account in order to the API server, to the Kubernetes API server, to accept issuing that token in the first place. If you say, hey, give me a token for this service account, bind it to this pod. If the pod does not use the service account, the Kubernetes API pod is going to say, no, you can't do that. And for the EKS pod identity feature, this is a requirement. To use this feature, the token has to be bound to a pod. And so basically, we cannot do multi-tenant workload identity with EKS pod identity. We can do it with IRSA, right? IAM roles for service accounts, which are not intended for pods. This is a feature from AWS that will allow us to do multi-tenant workload identity for AWS because it's not targeted to pods. So the concern here is if you could ask around inside Azure, if there are any plans in the future for restricting the tokens that we exchange, the thing we're doing here right now, right? The feature you just implemented for Azure Event Hubs, we are exchanging a service account token that is not bound to a pod for an Azure Access token.
Yeah, but when
We
we
need to
created
know.
the federated credential, we did federate that other service account with that managed identity. It's just that that service account is not the service account of the controller that is using it.
Yeah, that's the
But in the
thing. We are,
federation, we did specify that we want to federate that service account with this managed identity. So there, the user
yeah,
intent is kind of clear that they want to use another service account with that
yeah.
managed identity. It's just
Yeah,
that I
no,
think
you're
it's not
saying
the
like,
controller identity, but yeah, I can double check that.
yeah. I mean that I know that because I also tested that before, right? Like you have some I use the CLI, so in the CLI you
Yeah.
can literally create this association between the Azure identity and the
And the service
AKS
account.
service account. Yeah.
Mhm.
I did that, yeah. So we know that that works right now, right?
Mhm.
The concern is if in the future, like AKS will start enforcing this association to also like because this association is something that says, okay, if I see a service account token, because I associated it with an Azure identity, I am going to allow this to go through and give you an access token for this identity. But in the future, AKS could add this logic of, oh, I am also going to check if this token has a claim referring to a pod, which is what EKS pod
EKS
identity
does.
does right now. So
Okay.
our concern is, will this ever happen in the future? Because if it does, we are building something that will break, you know? So this is our concern. So if you could ask around about that, this is exactly what we need to know.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So yeah.
But
we
it
can-
feels like on the Azure side, because you do this binding, feels like they are not going to break this, right? Also,
Yeah.
AWS built a different service. They didn't break
Yeah, they
IAM
have the two
roles for service
features.
account. They said, oh, we are introducing a new way of doing it. So hopefully,
Yes.
Azure will
Mm,
never break what's in there today. And if they want to
Yep.
lock people, lock workloads on pod names, hopefully they will have it as a call it a different thing. I don't know, or make it an
Pod
extra
something.
option or whatever. Because yeah, we don't want to ship this today and in 3 months having, I don't know, Azure users coming screaming at us, hey, this no longer works on your AKS clusters, right? And we spend so much time implementing this. It's also about working on something, promising something to users, then a cloud provider decides, oh, you are abusing our feature, we are going to not allow this anymore, right? So
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
think this is
that's
gonna
our
happen, but
major concern.
I mean,
yeah,
specifically, like it is a workload identity, right? And like from the beginning, like using a Kubernetes service account that like we never even had to use service accounts for impersonation, right? Like the original proposals about this back before the RFC process even like was you can just use usernames. Like the like specifically like a service account in a Kubernetes cluster, the function of that object, it's not an abstract identity. It is designed to be mounted into a pod. Like there are plenty of other ways to authenticate and be authorized to the Kubernetes API. And like a Kubernetes service account is for pods. That is the only reason that they were made. And using a service account outside of the context of a pod is outside of the design, and it's just a consequence of the mechanism not being secure enough. So when I see a toggle to enable workload identity on a managed Kubernetes cluster, I would think now my pods can talk with their identity to the cloud control plane. Like, if you want the Flux pod to be able to assume different roles that are somehow namespaced, like you would hope that the IAM system is expressive enough to say, hey, you are allowed to assume these roles with these label tags for these namespaces.
Mm.
Right. And then Flux could promise that it does that. And that's something that can be designed. Like there's lots of ways to do that. Like you could literally use workload identity, say Flux is allowed to assume other roles and then have the roles be tagged. But like at the end of the day, like we are co-opting a mechanism, and so like there needs to be a way to express like within that mechanism that this is allowed. Because like otherwise, like in terms of what it says on the tin, like it's not supposed to work that way. If it does work that way and we can promise that it'll work that way for some period of time in which you're willing to support it, then that makes sense to me. Like if this lets people like get to a more secure environment for some period of time and we are willing to support that, then that sounds fine. Because the code is not complicated. But like at the end of the day, like if you were implementing like a hardware root of trust, like all the way down to the node, and the API server only trusted the node, and like all of the information is there to say no, to a very specific use case
Of
for
course.
what this feature is designed for.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny enough that Azure went from a workload identity tied to pods, and it wasn't even called workload identity, it was called pod identity, right?
Yeah, I think the previous one before workload identity.
Yeah. Because we've implemented that the first time ever for specifically for ECR and Azure Vault. Then that got deprecated, and we got this workload identity, which is no longer tied to a pod. So they started with tying everything to a pod. It was impossible to do what we do now with Azure pod identity back 2 years ago. They embraced workload identity, the concept that was cooking up in Google Cloud, right?
Yeah, I have the
got
impression that
kind of a one-of-one implementation with Google, because now it looks from a user perspective exactly the same, just that you have to add that label on the pods, right? Workload identity in Azure. That's another thing that I'm afraid of. Like when you read the workload identity in Azure, the docs are saying is not enough to annotate the service account. You need to annotate the pod,
yeah,
right?
because
That's why we have
when
in
you
our
do
documentation
yeah.
that patch, right?
Yeah, because when you add that label to the pod, it has to be a label because it's
A
a
label, yeah.
mutating webhook. Yeah, because it's a mutating webhook, and the mutating webhook mounts the projected
I know.
token with the audience
I know
of
what
Azure.
it does. I
Yeah.
know what it does. But in their docs, they say if you use workload identity, this is how you have to do it, right? And now we are not doing it because
Yes,
there is no pod.
there's no pod. There's no pod. So yeah,
Right? So yeah, Dipti, I think you should ask, because I think
Yeah.
we are kind of at the edge of the use
Mhm.
case.
And it can be
And
confusing for a user who's like referring to that doc. They
Yeah.
might have the service account name as well as the workload identity label
Yeah.
specified there, which would end up using like the single tenant, it would try to at least use that that service account associated with the
Yeah.
controller. So it can be confusing
Exactly.
as well. Mhm.
yeah.
That's
Ask if they
and
have this.
what
Ask if they have this mentality of a service account being designed for a pod, as Lee is putting, right? From the Kubernetes perspective, service account is designed for pods. Like, ask if this is something they understand, as well as like what service accounts are for, and if there's any future plans to restrict this feature to pods.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, like not validating that the pod claim is there, or providing some expressiveness in the IAM policy about that, that feels to me like a bug or even like CVE territory. Like it's like should have the workload's identity, right? It shouldn't be just like some random token from somewhere. And if that is permissive, I would imagine that it's on a schedule. Like I would imagine that people who build this stuff like made conscious decisions when looking at that jot in the tests, to like not validate it until like 3 years from now, when we can move customers, to make sure that everyone is using pod bound tokens. Because right now this is a feature flag that you can disable in the Kubernetes API. Like you can go back to using Kubernetes secrets, and every managed provider and Kubernetes distro provider like has some sort of support contracts with customers like 6 Kubernetes versions back or something like that, right? Like that's that. I imagine that this is on a deprecation schedule. Like that's what I would think. And like we should really chat with somebody who like knows intimately about what the product plan or the support plan or like what is actually intended, because there are other mechanisms that we can use in Azure.
Yeah,
To
I was thinking here, like all that the stuff we discussed earlier today, we don't really need any complicated solutions. If we, let's say, if this happens and service accounts are meant only for pods, if this lands, all we need to do is just issue a token for a username. That's it. We don't need a
Yes.
public OIDC provider, all that stuff. We don't need any of that. We really just need to change the subject of the Kubernetes token. And instead of being system : service account : namespace : name, it can be Flux : kind : namespace : name. Like something like that along those lines, right?
As long as the metadata
that's-
server will trade a cloud credential for
yeah,
that,
because
then yes.
because as long as the
Yeah, and you have a way to bind to it the federated identity to that.
yeah, but I think
which
like
today is
that-
supported only for service account.
Yeah, is that true, Deepti? Can you not
no, that's
bind?
not true. That's not true. You can choose the form of the subject, right? In the DPT, in the command that you associate an
Oh,
Azure
that's
identity with an OIDC identity, you put like system source account something something, right? I remember that from my tests.
Oh, so you just
can,
get a
yeah,
username.
yeah,
Oh,
because
perfect.
these features just piggyback on the plain vanilla
Yes.
OIDC provider feature that does not have anything to do with Kubernetes. So all of them, you can just use a subject string from the JWT. Like, oh, it's this subject
Hmm,
string, that's it. All of them, you can do that.
interesting.
Yeah. So
I
it can
think
literally just go with your original plan of just changing the subject of the token. That's it.
as long as that's guaranteed to work forever, then like
Yeah.
then that feels
Yeah, because this
correct to me. Yeah.
feature, wait, no, this association is an AKS feature, right?
Can we do that in
I mean,
EKS?
yeah, as far
It's
as
an
I
AKS
know, it
feature.
is a Kubernetes service account. You can specify the format, but I think you do specify the namespace and the service account. Like, I think there are Kubernetes for the scenario where Kubernetes accessing Azure resources, you need the cluster issuer URL, namespace, and service account, and it then concatenates all of them to generate the subject identifier. So
So
I
you
don't,
can't do arbitrary usernames, DP?
not that I'm aware of. It's the service account namespace and service account name.
I'm gonna
Okay.
And
Yeah,
double
then
of
check that.
course. I mean, the admission control does that.
That's not the case in AWS and Google. In AWS and Google, the subject string you can use is completely arbitrary. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
We should look into this a little bit.
Azure OIDC, because in Azure
when
you can also federate with GitHub Actions, right?
yeah, I mean, looking at this again, it is letting, like, I think you give the cluster show URL namespace service account and then it generates the subject identifier itself. It is allowing you to edit that subject identifier and give something else as well. But I don't know if that's that, like giving an arbitrary username is how it's intended to be used.
It feels
So,
like that's the kind of thing that should be possible. I think like again, like if you start from principles and you actually look at how Kubernetes authentication and authorization is designed, like the idea of a user is very central. Like it is part of the way that Kubernetes works, and system service accounts and system service account namespace, like the group, both of those things being stapled on to the jot is a special case that is designed for pods. And so I would expect a workload identity metadata server that is exchanging tokens for some principal with a service account to check that it is claimed as a pod. But if it's just a username, like I will happily
It's a
trade.
username. I just found a command. Let me send you the link. It's
Yeah.
just a username.
Yeah, if it's just a username, like there's no reason to check for the pod claim.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if I want to trust
Yeah.
the Kubernetes CA for whatever usernames, you could restrict it to being only service accounts for pods, but you could also say I allow
Here.
pod-bound service accounts, and I also allow usernames.
Here.
And that feels like
So
something that should be supported like in perpetuity.
so here you this
Yeah.
command, this is the one I used. It's associating the issuer of the cluster, okay, with
Yep.
this identity from this resource group with this subject. That's what I was saying. Like system, service account, namespace, name. This string can be anything. It can be Flux, customization, namespace, name.
Yes.
That's it.
True. Or even just namespace, yeah. Because like often they're binding
whatever
to
we
groups.
want, right? This is a username. This is a username in Kubernetes land.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I mean,
that
that's
makes me feel
how
good about Azure.
GitHub OpenID Connect works for Azure. I'm reading the docs now. So when you authorize, you want to run a kubectl apply from a GitHub action.
You configure the identity provider of GitHub Actions, which is tokens,
Yeah.
actions, something. and do the same
Yeah,
thing.
it's a string that whatever comes from
Mate-
GitHub.
Mateus,
Yeah.
our token signing API in Kubernetes, can we sign, can we get tokens for any username?
For you. That's something you told me it was possible, but I can check that.
I was thinking more along the lines of, oh yeah. Well, for impersonation, yes.
Yeah,
So I should
no, but
be,
impersonation, I think in impersonation, I think when you configure impersonation, what you actually do behind the scenes is you add HTTP headers to the requests with the username that you want to impersonate. So you
That's
send
correct.
your token. I think you send your token, let's say customer controller token,
Yes.
and then in the headers you say, hey, I want to impersonate this username. So I need to see if I can
I
issue
would
a token for a
presume,
user. But
yeah,
I
that if you
think you
were,
can.
yeah. And yeah, I think you can. Do we
How can I
restrict Flux
use
to only impersonating service accounts though? We might have to
it?
widen it.
S-
I think so.
token for
Yes, when we do applying, not when we talk to clouds. That's
In
different.
the RBAC. Yeah, but in this case, like I hadn't considered this possibility before, but I think what Mateus has just discovered is
No,
that
that's
we
what we
can.
discussed during KubeCon, man. That's what the conclusion we reached. Like, let's just use a custom username string and issue the token for that instead of service account. It
You may
actually
have
works.
reached that conclusion. I was reaching a different conclusion, which required a separate OIDC issuer that Flux would be related
Oh,
to. But this is
okay.
actually using the Kubernetes issuer, right?
Yeah,
And then you are,
exactly.
can we get a token for for whatever username Kubernetes will trust us with? Because if so, then we can give that potentially to the metadata server, which will potentially agree to exchange it.
Yeah.
So that would need to be tested and promised, but that feels to me like a better solution. Because if that works, at least in Azure, it should work forever.
Yeah, and the others too. Like, yeah, I'm searching here, and
Because that
ChatGPT doesn't have good news. It's showing the code for service accounts, which we already have, but it has, if you really need user tokens, you can have bootstrap tokens for node joins. That doesn't sound like what we want. Well, anyway, I'll research this.
this feels possible. And if this works, it feels like the kind of thing that a cloud provider could promise to work forever, because it allows you in the metadata server to, when it's a service account, you can check that it's a pod. But if it's not a service account, then you're just trusting it. And that implicitly gives
Yeah.
you like a choice there in the principal name, whether or not something should be a pod workload identity or some other random thing. So that's like basically adding that Boolean flag inside of the IAM expression. For direct access, I wonder if this is also possible, if you are able to address specific usernames inside of direct access for GKE. Because it feels like
It's possible for workload anti-federation, but I don't think it's possible for GKE. Oh shit.
Because if you have a
Is
token that
this
has a username, it must have some sort of identity, right? Because you're just giving the JOT directly to the Google Cloud Control
yeah,
APIs.
in the case of GCP workload anti-federation, you just look at the subject, like what we would do for Azure, as
Yes.
what we're just talking about. In GKE, it's the principal syntax
It's like it's its own thing.
different. It
It's like
assumes, yeah, it
SA
assumes service
slash.
account. Yeah, like
Yeah.
something like that. Let me find it here real quick. Just
Yeah,
GKE workload.
that's
Oh
interesting.
shit. Oh shit.
Come on, I need to go.
Anyway,
Let's end
yeah.
it.
Let's
We can research.
Okay.
let's
So,
follow
I
up with
found
something.
it.
There
Let's
was
see.
another thing I wanted to discuss at the beginning about the docs. So we need to delete all the docs around workload identity from all the APIs. and add some
Right.
kind of phrase everywhere to point to the only doc that explains what workload identity is, how you configure it. And another thing that's in your pull request, Mateus, around the docs, we actually have to talk about all the services that we support workload identity. That can't be, oh, here is an example,
Cloud
bind some
providers.
cloud providers, controllers. We can't do that, man. I mean,
Yeah.
people struggle a lot with this kind of configuration. We need to link to the cloud providers, like Dipti was saying. Oh, if you look at the talks that she wrote for Azure Event Hub, so all those instructions have to be now in this workload identity doc, grouped by clouds. In each cloud, all the services that we provide, KMS, ECR. There are not many of those. Like for every cloud, we have 3 services that we talk to. Is the KMS stuff for decryption, is the container registry, is the bucket. And only for Azure, we have a 4th one, DevOps, which is a Git, right? So it's not that much of a
Yeah, there's
effort.
also PubSub for notification controller in Google and Event Hubs for Azure in notification controller.
Yeah. So for all these services, we need a section, and then with a subtitle, so someone ask on Slack, here is the link how you configure workload identity for Azure, and you have all the services in Azure. So you only are interested in KMS Google, here is the link for KMS Google. So instead of having like 20 docs, for everywhere, we consolidate on a single workload identity doc that explains what we are doing, how we are doing it for single tenant, multi-tenant. I would also link to the RFC there for the multi-tenant so people can see what was the chain of thought for doing this and so on, right? But we are going to ship a bunch of code around workload identity, and we need to ship very consistent docs and very clear docs of what was happening.
Oh.
Right, and that's
about listing the services, it's really just listing them in the workload identity docs, right? Because there's no configuration difference for them. The only difference is like customization, right? Because it's spec dot decryption dot service account name. For everything else, spec dot service account name. So what would you like to see in that regard?
Workload identity is not about multi-tenant workload identity. It's about all the workload identity features in Flux. So of course you have to say, you need to bind the notification service account to this IAM role when you want to talk with Azure Event Hub. You don't bind the source controller service account.
Okay, you mean like talking about the permissions on the cloud side for the cloud identity, right?
Permissions on the cloud side, Bootstrap patch on the Flux side, because you need to patch if you patch the source controller if you patch the source controller service account and you add there the annotation for Event Hub, it will not work.
No, the annotations are the same everywhere. Like the Event Hub annotation is the same for Azure DevOps or
it's not about the annotation, it's the service account and the pod, man.
Oh, okay. You mean in the case of single tenant workload?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So we are removing all the docs from all the APIs. We need a single doc for workload identity where we list all the cloud providers, all the services, how these services can be configured with workload identity attached to the controller pod. So we need to say for Azure Event Hub, you need to do this on the cloud provider side. You need to have this patch in Bootstrap for single tenant. For multi-tenant, you need the service account in the object with this annotation, right?
Right.
So this doc has to be a matrix. It's type of cloud, it's the cloud provider, is the service, and for each service there are two configurations.
Cool. Okay.
Hey Hussein, you ended up probably on the wrong meeting.
Yeah, it does feel
there's
like for a while we are going to need to support the single tenant and then the multi-tenant mechanism. And so,
No,
Stefan,
forever we need to support
gonna-
the single
yeah.
tenant.
you're saying,
Yeah.
Forever. There are
we don't plan to remove it.
yeah,
never like
Stefan, yeah, but like it'll be a primary pathway. Like, I mean, the multi-tenant configuration will probably be like it if it's built right and it's easy to configure, then I mean, like people will probably just use that. Because it'll be easier to express. It doesn't require modifying the Flux controllers. Like the API will just work.
no, I'm telling you, there are like tons of Flux users who move to EKS workload identity, which is tied to a pod. They have one cluster per team. They do
Yes.
hard multi-tenancy. They have no intention of doing this thing that we are building here.
I see.
So single
so you-
tenant workload identity will stay forever.
So your request here is that the docs are disparate across the APIs right now, and we want to build a doc for a central doc for implementing single tenant multi-tenancy independent of the RFC that we have open for multi-tenant stuff.
Yes, we already
And
have
by the way-
such a doc, which is very lightweight. It's very confusing.
Mhm.
And we can't remove all the things from all the APIs unless we build this doc correctly, where we list the clouds, we list the services, and we list the patches. Now it's like, oh, you should do a patch that looks like this. And it's only ECR and one KMS example. So instead of that, we should have all the examples in there. So then we can clean up the API docs, which are a mess right now.
Yeah, I mean, we
Uh-huh.
used to have like use case documentation for like managed Kubernetes clusters that like enabled features and all kinds of stuff, and then said, hey, you can use Flux with this cluster this way. But over time, that stuff bit rot and required maintenance. So none of that is in the Flux documentation anymore. But you think that maintaining this workload identity stuff like will be like for each service that we support and that kind of thing, like
Yes,
basically
this will be the canonical way of documenting things, because right now the canonical way of documenting the integration is API docs.
Mhm.
And the problem is 99% of the code is copy-pasted from one API doc to another.
Mhm.
Right? So we have the same exact bootstrap patch in 20 docs. And for example, we discovered, oh, whoever wrote the first doc for Azure didn't read correctly the documentation and thought the label have to be added on the deployment and the pod, when in fact it only has to be added on the pod. So now to remove the label, we need to open 10 pull requests for all the APIs just to remove that label. And the API docs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger with details on how to patch controllers, which shouldn't be in the API doc. There's not a function that someone that wants to use the API should read. That's a cluster admin concern. The people that are setting up Flux should know about workload identity because they need to create the role bindings beforehand, right? The end user will not go and type, will not use the Azure CLI to assign some service account to some service. That's a cluster admin, I don't know, platform team responsibility, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
And
so-
so we have this workload identity page dedicated for it. That's the place.
Yeah, I have 3 points to talk about that documentation. The first one is when we talk about the permissions that have to be assigned to the identity for each service, there's an overlap with secret authentication. Let's say the APIs where you can have a GCP service account JSON key. That's for impersonating an identity that has the same permissions as if you were using workload entity. So maybe we should split this doc in two. One that talks only about permissions and identities, and one that talks about workload identity. So and they have to be linked somehow, because then we decouple, like, we're gonna link to this documentation of permissions and identities for both secrets and workload entity, right? And so there's that. Another thing is specifically in customization API, we have this controller global decryption section, which talks about environment authentication, which is not necessarily workload entity. It could be in Google, for example, it could be Google application credentials environment variable pointing to a file that you mount in the controller pod with a JSON key there's no difference at all for the controller code if you were using single tenant workload identity. Like I mean, now it does because we have the library and everything, but if you're just using the Google library will try both. Would try Google application credentials environment
Yeah.
variable or workload entity. So that section is talking about environment authentication. And there's one case where it's different from the cloud providers, which is Vault, right? HashiCorp Vault. You can have global decryption for HashiCorp with some environment variable there. And that's not workload entity. So we have yet another thing, which is maybe just customization controller, right? Which is global decryption, and that may or may not be workload entity. So we have to take that into account as well. And the third item I would like to talk about is in the workload entity documentation, we need, like right now in my pull request to the website repo, I am adding this section that splits single tenant from multi-tenant, right? Controller level. I called it controller level, workload entity, and object level, saying that the service account configuration is the same, but I am showing just the patch for the controller. I want input from you guys if I should yet split single tenant and multi-tenant, or keep both in the same workload entity documentation and still try to organize it in a way where we make it clear what each are, and that they have this common part of the annotations in the service account, which is the same for both, except that in single tenant, you're annotating the controller service account, but in multi-tenant, you're annotating the object service account. So I want input from those three things.
I definitely think we need two different sections. Very clear how you assign an identity to the controller for each service, what patches you need. Then another section around impersonating service accounts when talking to cloud providers.
So controller level and object level, two separate sections.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, in the same page, workload and entity talks.
Yes, because both of them are using the same procedure.
Yeah, and
okay.
it's like the same mechanism. But then for the separate thing that Matthias was talking about for like the secret based authentication, that feels like another variation of config.
It is,
and
yeah.
it's the controller based kind.
No, it's not controller based. This is still object level, right? It's secret
That's the
ref.
object level one.
but it has this overlap with workload identity where the permissions and identities are the same. It's just that,
It's both.
yeah,
It's both.
you're just the way you're either just authenticating through a secret or through workload identity, but the behind that, the permissions are the same for both.
Technically,
Because we have object level with secrets referenced on an object. For example, a bucket can reference a Google JSON file that contains all the keys. But then you can mount that JSON file in the controller and becomes a global, right? What customized controller does.
yeah.
And why we ended up with this mess is because that's how Flux works, right? Someone says, I have this JSON key. I don't want to put it into each object. I'm using single tenant. I'm running
Yeah.
one cluster per tenant. I don't want to put this secret in 1,000 namespaces, right? So we've implemented this global decryption thing, right? So yeah, we can't just drop support for any of this. We have to have really good structured docs to explaining all the ways
Okay.
you can configure it, and you choose what's best for your use case, right?
So I propose this. I propose we have 3 documentations. Each is a single web page in the Flux website. One for permissions and identities, one for workload identity that has single tenant and multi-tenant, right? Controller level or object level. And a third one for secrets, which also has controller level and object level. Then we link, like we can link the secrets and workload identity pages to the permissions and identities, and link permissions and identities back to the other 2 as well. We don't need to link. We may want to link as well. Like we may want to do a triangle and link all of them somehow. But yeah, I think we should have these 3 pages. And for the specific case of customized controller, I don't think we have the same kind of thing in any other controllers, which is the Vault global decryption thing. We're just gonna need to rework the global decryption section of the customization API to contemplate everything that is not secret or workload identity based, and just link to the 2 pages, and everything else, which is probably just Vault, then we document it there. How about that?
It will also be, we really need to implement age as well.
Age, yeah. So
Not
age,
only Vault,
does
age.
does age have global decryption method?
We need to implement that. It's simple. You put the key somewhere and that's it. You mount the
Okay.
key in the pod and you read the private key.
Okay.
But it makes no
Okay.
sense to support global for Vault and not support global for age, which is pure static. You don't need to talk to any kind of outside service. If you have single tenant dedicated, you do hard multi-tenancy where a cluster is dedicated to a team. That team has a single encryption key for staging, one encryption key for prod, which it's a major use case. Like so many people are doing this. Right?
So age is like, so age is the encryption key itself is in the secret, while Vault is actually a credential like in the cloud providers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Vault can be in cluster or a cloud service from HashiCorp or something. Both.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
that's correct. Yeah.
Or
And-
running in a different cluster, also self-hosted. You have lots of options, right?
Now, for Flux 2.6, I guess we need these 3 documentation pages, right? The rework of global decryption for customized controller. But do we also need global decryption with age
No.
for 2.6? Okay, so from
No.
all of what we discussed right now, everything is 2.6 except global decryption with age.
Yeah.
Goes to 2.7.
It's pretty much all just documentation rework, right? That's like its own task. There's no new features.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because like at the beginning of the convo, I was a little bit confused.
But it's as
but, yeah.
complex as a feature itself.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
Like
it's
Huge buffer.
holy shit.
How does it
it's quite
prioritize?
a
I may
well.
need some help with
Yeah,
So
because I mean,
Mateus will do the implementation, like we talked at the beginning of the meeting. Get the auth package everywhere, enable caching. And Lee, you can work on the docs.
okay. I'll work on the docs.
Yeah,
So
so
you
you
can
need
probably take
to.
over. I have a PR open for the workload entity docs. I guess you
Mhm.
can probably take over.
Oh, are you a maintainer of the website?
I think just the community repo right now. I don't think website repo.
Okay. Okay,
But
you can create a pull request to add yourself as a maintainer to the website,
mhm.
and then you can push once we add you as you'll have push rights to the website, and you can take over the pull request because the branch is in the website, and you have to be a maintainer to be able to push
to
to
be able
it.
to push to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you prefer it that way versus working on your own fork?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Kind of makes no difference to me. But is
So,
that
so
for
the big
CI?
difference is everywhere it's around CI, right? If
Yeah.
you
So
open
there's
a pull
trust
request
it.
from a fork, you can't run stuff. Here we publish a preview
Yeah.
on a with Netlify and everything.
So you're not publishing previews for external forks. Okay.
I don't think we can. I think it's a secret somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But lots of CI does not work when you do a pull request.
Yeah.
That I know for sure, because if any secret mentioning there, it will not work. Of course, you don't want to share GitHub secrets with anyone
Yes.
that forks your pull request. Is normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would really appreciate your help with the docs here, because as Matteo
Yeah.
said, it's a huge task on its own. And
But to be honest, I think the really big one is gonna be the one with the permissions and identities, because that's the one that is gonna need an exhaustive list of each service we integrate with for each cloud provider. Whereas the other two are actually small because they only need to talk about the annotations in the service account and say how you do the patches which we already have for the controller, and in the case of multi-tenant, you just have to talk about the fields, the service
Yeah.
account name fields. There's a few exceptions, like in customized controller, spec.decryption, and in Azure you have the label in the pod. So these are like the two outliers. For secrets, for the secrets documentation, it's also like similar to workload entity, right? Because it's all like always talk about, like for each cloud provider you're gonna have like an O of 6 complexity documentation, because for each cloud provider you need to say how you can configure controller level, and that's different for each one. Like the Google, it's Google application credentials, and the other two has their own ways.
It
but this
feels
And then
already documented, right?
yeah,
They are
you just
documented
have to,
somewhere. It's all
yeah, all of this is documented somewhere.
yeah.
But I'm just saying that the secrets and workload identity one were gonna be not so huge as the permissions and identities one.
It feels like this is also the kind of thing that could have some accompanying customized patches or generators or something. The reason I say that is A, for just the developer experience of someone reading the docs to actually get from like the combining your what is it? User permissions document? What did you call it?
Permissions and identities.
Permissions and identities, right? Permissions and identities with the services and their associated controllers. And then there is the the workload identity one for object and controller, and then there's the secret one for object and controller. Like you basically kind of have this like m times n combination where you're like, hey, like these sorts of things for this purpose.
Yeah, it's a
with these
matrix. Yeah.
permissions.
Yeah,
right?
it's
And
a
then
three-dimensional matrix. It's a service, secret or
Two.
authentic or workloadity and
yeah,
object level or control level.
you have
So-
the
so-
the identity is on the left, and then you have all of the 4 different ways that you can deploy them on the right or on the
Ye-
other axis, and then it's a 2-dimensional combination of
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, yeah,
And
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
if you can
That's a good
generate
way.
that, then that kind of seems maintainable, and it might even be a feature that you could use partially inside of Flux operator.
What?
Like say for Flux operator, you have a Google section, right? And you can just throw in a couple of IDs, and then now you have single tenant controller based
Oh
off,
yeah, for sure.
right?
We have cluster type. We have cluster type, and that's what so we have this cluster that has type AWS, type Google, type, and this is now just, you know, a way for you to identify easily a Flux instance. But my main goal with that field
Yeah,
was to provision workload identity and have in the cluster workload identity as an array. Oh, source controller needs to bind to this. This one needs to access this, and then generate all the patches automatically.
Yeah.
Service accounts, labels, everything, right?
Yes.
But this is controller level only, right? It can be both secrets
Yes.
or workload identity, but has to be
No,
controller
it's-
level only, right?
Yes, controller level, right? We don't want to, because otherwise we need some kind of admission to, oh, it's a
Yeah.
service account deploying this namespace. Let me add, I don't want to get there. It's too messy. But for controller level, it could definitely be super valuable to people instead of, you know, writing all these patches for, oh, I'm doing OCI here, write this patch. I'm doing KMS here, write this patch. I'm doing
Yeah.
Azure DevOps, write this patch. And you have like tons of patches right in the Flux instance. As is the same with Bootstrap. You have tons of patches are the same patches in the way, right? And
Yeah.
if we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
make
I'm
it
trying to
very
understand-
simple.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand why the patches is different for each controller, but it's just because the target name of the deployment, right? I would just remember that because from the source account perspective, it's the same. It's just the annotations for all controllers.
It's not the
But
same.
what-
The service account is different, man.
Oh,
It's
the
called
source account.
source controller. It's called image reflector controller.
Right,
It's
right,
called
right. Yeah,
customized
yeah. So
controller.
there's the
And the
names. Yeah, there are the
annotation is
names.
different
Yeah.
because the value of the annotation is different. You are not going to bind KMS and ECR to the same thing. Like you shouldn't be doing that and grant source controller and customized controller access to KMS. You shouldn't be doing that. You should create a
Yeah.
dedicated binding for customized controller service account, right?
Yeah.
So in the
Yeah,
end,
I
you'll
mean,
end
yeah.
up with 8 patches for every single controller and for every single service account. So there are 16 patches. No, Helm controller does not do any cloud, does not talk to clouds.
Yeah.
So it's
For now, it will have with
for now.
cube
So
config.
it's 5 patches or
Yeah.
2 times 2 because there are 2 objects all the time is the controller deployment and controller service account. So you'll have 10 patches,
Yes. 10
right?
pages.
That we need to document in this workload identity doc and have them
Yes.
listed very clear for each service. Hey, this is how you should do it, right?
Yes. And
Because
in
now how
secrets,
most
it's
people are
just
doing
5.
it, they search GitHub discussions because there in GitHub discussions, people have been continuously asking, oh, how can I do this? How can I do with KMS? How can I do it with that, right?
And in secrets documentation is just 5, right? Just the deployments, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, no service accounts there.
Yeah.
But so Lee, what I suggest is starting with workload identity single tenant, like the workload identity that binds to the service accounts of the controllers,
Hmm.
and have that documented in a single place for all the controllers. Why? Because you already have all this documentation on all the APIs. So
Yeah.
that will be step one. Once we move this to the workload identity doc, we can merge it and publish it tomorrow, because we are not saying anything about multi-tenant service account,
Yes.
right? And we can ship this in stages. So the
Yes.
first major improvement that we can do is have the workload identity doc document everything that we currently support.
Yes.
Then we open another pull request for the RFC, where
Yeah, in that case, you don't
add
even need
the
to
new
get my pull
dimension.
request. Yeah,
Right.
you don't even need to use my pull request because mine is considering multi-tenant, so
Is
you can just
mixing
start a new
things.
one. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Let's do it like this and not try to solve the whole thing in one pull request that it will be
Yeah.
very huge. First, we
Yeah.
figure out workload identity for controller pods, we document it. Then we have the secret keys that's also documented everywhere. We can also ship that. And finally, we ship the ones that are matching the RFC only for the services that we are going to support in 2.6, because we are not implementing the whole RFC in 2.6. It will probably take us, not for sure, it will take us 2.7 as well. So, and we'll have like 3 pull requests, right?
We need-
No, we're gonna have 5 pull requests, right? 2 for workload entity. Oh, or 4. 2 for workload entity, 1 that we ship tomorrow and 1 that we ship with 2.6. And for secrets, we can have just 1 for controller level and object level. That
Yes.
also is something we can ship to tomorrow. And a 4th pull request for permissions and identities. But we should actually list all the services there because those are already supported by secrets. So we need to
Yes.
cross-reference the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also just thought about something. Maybe in the second pull request for workload identity, we need to list. There is the place where we can list the APIs that are supported in 2.6, and then in 2.7, when we implement everything, then we can remove that.
Yeah. Uh-huh. That
Right?
sounds like a decent doc strategy for that.
Yeah, so 4 PRs.
Yeah.
So the single tenant workload identity is the highest priority, and then probably secrets,
for both.
and then permissions and identities.
Yeah.
And then
finally, the last one
is
multi-tenant
the
workload.
multi-tenant one with the staged rollout of supported APIs.
Yeah.
And we need all 4 by the time we release 2.6, because when we are going to release 2.6,
There will be multi-tenant
going
features
to-
already.
yes, and we are going to delete all the duplicated things from all the APIs and link to this unified doc, right?
Which our target for that is when?
End of this month.
End of the month. Okay, cool. I will need to ship that. So I'm planning to take off for the last week of this month. And then the week after that, we are all working together in the London office.
What? No?
May. Yeah.
You are confusing the months. We are not going to the London office this month.
No, it's the week
Next
after.
month.
Yeah, the first week of next month. Yeah, so the
Yeah,
end
but we
of
need-
this month, I'm planning to take some days off. And
Yeah,
then the week
same.
after that.
I'm taking vacation on the week of the 20th May, when is my birthday. So also take a
Okay,
week
so-
vacation this month. So it's like three
So-
3 weeks this month
So
for me.
Flux
and you.
release is after your vacation, Stefan?
Yeah, we can do it. I don't know,
in London.
in London, yeah.
Let's release Flux that week. Then
No, but along the workshops, we have 4 workshops to be on. Maybe
yeah,
Flux
that
release
seems like a
with
lot of
that.
stuff to do. That was
Do
my
it.
first thought when I saw that list of
Let it-
things to do while we were there, is that there's probably lots of stuff that we need to get done, like just on the project while we're working together.
But I think it's probably fine. Stefan, you said you're out on the week of the 20, right?
Yes. So on the week 26-30, we can do the release. If
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have the docs ready by 23, then Lee will take vacation 26-30, but the two of
Mhm.
us can do the Flux release that week. Because
Yes,
if we
and
have the
then
docs by the 23 of May,
Yeah.
that's fine. We can do the
Okay.
release.
So I'll spend the next
Yeah.
3 weeks getting these docs in a shape where we're happy to release them.
cool.
But that's going to need to
And
include some of the 2.6 multi-doc. So
Yep.
okay, cool. Yeah.
Anyway, let's finish everything by then, and we can take over the last pull request with the multi-tenancy. If you have something sketch up in a pull request, we can take over and merge it before the
Cool.
release.
Yeah, that's
Right?
doable.
That's not yeah.
Um,
So if you can do the 3 by the end of 26, single workload
23.
identity, 23 of May. Single workload identity, the secret stuff, and the permission mapping,
yeah.
that will be fine.
When it comes to the supported services thing, with regard to GKE direct access, basically the identities and permissions. Direct access requires impersonating a service account, or if something doesn't support direct access, do we just not support that thing? Or this is really a
Yeah,
question about how it's implemented.
yeah, I guess we say well, because you're gonna have to list each service of Google, right? And then in that service, you can say if it's supported by direct access or not.
So do we support impersonating a service account from
No.
workload identity?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right now, workload entity controller level can use both direct access and GCP service account impersonation. And that's also
Yeah.
gonna be supported for multi-tenant as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to look at where does somebody configure that?
When you configure that, you don't have to do anything in Kubernetes. Like let's say you're doing this today for controller level, right? Then you don't do anything at all in the Kubernetes side. You do everything on the Google Cloud side. You just assign the permissions that you need to the principal that encodes the GKE service account. So it's entirely on Google side.
That's for okay. So the client, say it needs to talk to a service with direct access and then a service that's an impersonated service account, Google service account. The client doesn't have to do anything to do one or the other.
No,
It's both at
because
the same time.
if you are talking about controller level, the client doesn't have to do anything. If you do storage.new service context,
Yeah.
that will try to use workload identity, that will try to use Google application credentials environment variable, and one other thing, which is like a well-known file created by gcloud CLI. These are the 3 things all the Google
So specifically within the workload identity thing, for APIs on the Google side that are not supported by direct access, if you have a workload identity, you don't have to do anything to talk to APIs that support it. But if you want to talk to an API that does not support direct access,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you need to.
If you want to use direct access and the API you're targeting supports it, you don't need to do anything in the cluster. You still need to grant the permissions to the principal encoding the service account. But if you want to use GCP service account impersonation, you still don't like, in this case, you need to annotate the controller service account with the GCP
Yes.
service account.
You need to
I
annotate
see.
it, yeah.
Okay.
And then
So that's how it works.
and in the Google side, you need to do two things. You need to grant impersonation permission to the
Yes.
service account. That's the workload identity user role. And
Yes.
the other thing is granting the actual permission you want to the GCP service account.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, GCP IAM supports direct access, and GCP IAM, you would, on the direct access, add the impersonation privilege for the Google service account, and then on the Kubernetes service account, you annotate the Google service account. So then somehow the metadata server knows to give you an impersonated token.
Yes.
So this is
Yes.
basically like how like source controller could talk to Google source repositories, even though it's like a
No,
Yeah, because we don't support, we
No.
don't integrate with Google source repositories. The only API, the only cloud we support for Git repository is Azure.
Azure DevOps.
Yes.
so we talk about here. So the main where we use workload identity everywhere is accessing container registries, right?
Mm-hmm.
ECR, GAR, ACR, all of them support workload
All the
identity.
APIs.
Then
Yeah, I think
All the APIs.
GCR is technically deprecated, but that's another API where
GAR,
no, yeah. So GC
Google Artifact Registry.
no, the
We
old
s-
one.
We
Yes,
support
the old-
also the old one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is I think GAR supports direct access, but GCR does
Nice.
not.
Nice.
So
You can put that on the
Then
permissions docs.
So I think on GCR, right, you would show I'm trying to think, are there services that we support where there's going to be a difference in how the Google access is configured? Because that's
Yeah.
it's like
but
it's a
I
thing.
think we deprecated GCR. And
Yeah, maybe.
we keep only guard in the docs. You need to check in source control.
Yeah.
Another thing that where we support across the board all the types of authentications and everything is customized controller with KMS.
Yeah.
Is Google KMS, is Azure Vault, and is AWS KMS.
So you need to be able to configure
These-
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
These three, we support every type of authentication out there. Then another object that supports every single type of authentication is the bucket.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not only workload identity, SAS keys, like there are a bunch of ways of authentications with the bucket, we support them all.
Yeah. Because
Right?
basically in the identities and permissions doc, like for Google stuff, there's gonna be this fork, right? Where it's like, here's how you do it with an impersonated service account via workload identity, and then here's how it's done with direct access.
And also, so two
And
things here.
secrets.
Stefan just said something that is important for the secrets doc, which is in some APIs, we have different types of secrets for authentication. Like, for example, in Azure Event Hubs, we have today in Flux 2.5, we have a JWT token that probably nobody uses because there's no way to, like, those are temporary. You have some Chrome job that generates it, and then you mount the secret.
I think that was the
that
Azure
weird
pod
thing.
identity thing. I wrote a generator for the JOTs, and it
Yeah,
stuck
yeah,
the
yeah.
secrets.
Yeah.
That's a really long
There's
time
also
ago.
the
Yeah.
SAS string for Azure Event Hubs as well. So I suppose those kinds of different secrets that depend on the cloud provider / service, those should probably be on the secrets docs, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to talk is, since you're asking about which Google services support direct access and which don't, I have tested KMS. KMS with direct access, it works. So KMS works with direct access. Google Storage only works with direct access if there's no fine-grained access control per object in the bucket. The bucket has to have bucket level access control.
Okay. I
There's
think
that.
Google has a table about this. And yeah, like
Mm,
for where
great.
it's
You can look at
supported,
the
but it
table.
has an asterisk that there's only certain like ACLs that you can put on there or certain access lists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you should look at KMS, GCS.
And that's going to be a constantly changing table. So like we should probably just link to Google's table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
from
yeah,
the-
for sure.
Yeah.
Eventually, all the services will support direct access, and this
You
will
would
no longer
hope.
be a problem, right? Yeah.
You would
yeah.
hope. Yeah.
So that would be KMS, GCS, GAR and GCR, and the Google
PubSub.
PubSub.
Man, we've implemented so many integrations. Too much.
That's why
We
people
need to
use it.
delete some of those. We need to delete some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Let's stop talking.
Let's stop. It's I'm 2 hours in.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye, guys.
See you guys.
Bye,
Bye.
friends.